I hadn't planned to be here, not tonight. But the moment she appeared in the softly lit room, the air seemed to shift around us. She leaned slightly against the doorway, one hand curling around the frame, the other brushing absent-mindedly along the edge of the table, and I felt something in my chest tighten without warning. There was a grace in her that I couldn't name, a quiet authority that made the space bend toward her, yet underneath it, a subtle vulnerability that made her impossibly human. "Funny running into you here," she said, her voice low, melodic, almost teasing, but there was a pause, a hesitation that I noticed immediately. That pause, that fragment of a second, said more than words ever could. I nodded, but my voice caught somewhere between wanting to speak and simply wanting to look. She had always had that effect on me. Even now, after all these months of stolen glances and unspoken thoughts, I still felt the pull, like gravity itself had a preference for her. We stood too close for casual conversation, yet far enough apart that the space between us vibrated with tension. I could feel the warmth radiating from her as she adjusted her posture, and my hand twitched, almost imperceptibly, toward her but stopping short, afraid to betray the pull that had drawn me in long before tonight. Her eyes flicked to my hands, then back to mine, holding my gaze just long enough to make my stomach roll. There was a knowing in that glance, a subtle acknowledgement that neither of us had spoken aloud but both of us had understood. I imagined the brush of her fingers if she reached out, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air, jasmine and something darker, warmer, like late summer evenings. "I wasn't expecting to see you here," she murmured, letting the words trail into the quiet hum of the room. Her lips curved in that half-smile, half-sigh that always left me unsteady, my thoughts slipping into places I wasn't supposed to go. I wanted to tell her how I'd imagined this moment countless times, the slow awareness of her, the weight of her presence beside me. Instead, I let silence stretch between us, letting the tension speak. She shifted, brushing her hand near mine again, almost accidental, almost innocent, but my fingers tingled from the contact that wasn't contact, and I noticed the subtle quiver in her breath. "You always know what to say, don't you?" she whispered, and I saw the small tremor in her shoulders, the faint catch in her throat. There was more there than words could touch, a hint of worry, desire, curiosity, a cocktail of emotion that made her impossibly close and yet terrifyingly distant all at once. I stepped just a fraction nearer, careful, deliberate, as if moving any faster would shatter the fragile space we occupied. Her eyes followed me, wide and luminous, the corners crinkling as though she were holding back a laugh, or a confession. I wanted to lean in, brush the tip of my finger along hers, let the silence between us hum louder than any words could. Then, just as the world seemed to shrink to the two of us, a sudden click, the door behind her opening, shattered the moment. She froze, her eyes flicking toward the sound, and I realized we'd been teetering on the edge of something dangerous, something intoxicating. Her lips parted slightly, and her voice came out in a whisper, trembling just enough to make my pulse leap. "My body knows this is wrong." I smiled softly, almost tenderly, leaning just close enough that my voice brushed against her ear. "Then let me teach it something better." And the room held its breath. I hadn't realized how long we'd stood there, caught in that unspoken orbit, until her hand brushed against mine again, deliberate this time, a fleeting touch that left warmth crawling up my arm. I forced myself to look away, pretending to examine the books stacked haphazardly on the table, though my mind replayed the sensation over and over. She laughed softly, a sound that made the space feel smaller, cozier, and impossibly intimate. "You're awfully quiet tonight," she said, letting her hand rest near my elbow, the contact almost teasing. There was something about the curve of her smile that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. I wanted to tell her I hadn't been quiet at all, that every glance, every pause, had been a conversation in itself. But words felt clumsy, inadequate, so I simply nodded, and she tilted her head as if reading the unspoken in my eyes. It wasn't just desire, it was history too. I knew she carried echoes of other lives in her posture, the way her shoulders occasionally slumped as if bearing invisible weight. Her past relationships, brief, flawed, the kind that leave a lingering ache, had made her cautious, meticulous with trust. And I, Well, I wasn't immune to my own vulnerabilities. I had always been drawn to older women, their poise and quiet self-assurance, yet terrified of overstepping invisible boundaries. Tonight, both of us danced around that invisible line, conscious of the risk. Age, perception, whispered judgments, they hovered over us like ghosts, making every look and brush of skin feel daring, almost illicit. She was aware, too. I saw it in the way her fingers lingered on the small of my back, then pulled away, a calculated retreat that left me aching for more. "You've changed since the last time I saw you," she murmured, leaning just a fraction closer so her breath brushed my cheek. The warmth hit me in a way that made my pulse stutter. I wanted to close the distance, to let my hand rest over hers without hesitation, but restraint felt necessary, for now. Her eyes searched mine for something unspoken. I caught a flicker of vulnerability there, the subtle tremble of someone used to being both in control and dangerously close to losing it. That tiny split between confidence and fragility made me ache to reach out, to anchor her without words. I could feel the tension building, like static electricity along our skin. Every shift of her weight, every breath that skimmed mine, was a conversation of its own. And yet, the real danger lay in how easy it was to slip past caution, how quickly the forbidden could feel inevitable. When her hand brushed my shoulder this time, I didn't move away. She lingered just long enough to let the contact settle, and then her eyes met mine with a quiet acknowledgement. A question. A dare. And without speaking, we understood. The bond had deepened, stronger for the risk, more potent for the restraint. And for a brief, suspended moment, the room, the world, shrank to just the two of us, sharing a breath, a touch, and a secret that neither dared to name aloud. The soft ping of her phone on the table made both of us flinch. It was a trivial sound, yet in the quiet of the room, it felt like an alarm. She glanced at it, and then at me, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. I saw her hesitation, the brief flicker of guilt that passed across her face, and it made my chest ache in a way that words could never fix. I wanted to reach for her hand again, to let her feel that I wasn't going anywhere, but I stopped myself. We were already on dangerous ground, the kind that pulled you forward even when every rational thought screamed to stay back. Her eyes lifted to mine, and for a moment, the rest of the world dissolved. The space between us felt charged, like a storm about to break. She leaned slightly forward, just enough that her shoulder brushed mine. A shiver ran up my spine. Her proximity was intoxicating, and I caught the faint scent of her hair, something sweet and warm, that made me forget to breathe. "You shouldn't," she started, her voice low, almost breaking, but the words caught in her throat. I could feel the tension coil through her, the struggle between restraint and desire. Before she could finish, a muffled knock on the door startled us both. She jerked slightly, stepping back, her hand hovering near mine as if seeking permission, guidance, or maybe a lifeline. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my pulse under control, but the sight of her retreating only drew me closer, an invisible pull I could not resist. We exchanged a glance loaded with unspoken meaning, our faces inches apart now. Every heartbeat, every shallow inhale, was a conversation in itself. I could almost feel her questioning me, wondering if I understood what she wanted, what she feared, what she might allow. Her lips parted just slightly, as though she were about to say something, or maybe just to close the distance between us. My own lips felt dry, every nerve taut, and I leaned forward just a fraction, testing the air between us, tasting the tension like a fragile promise. But then, her eyelids fluttered, and she stepped back again, shaking her head ever so slightly. "It's complicated," she murmured, though either of us needed words to know what she meant. The room held its breath, thick with anticipation and the pull of something neither of us could name, let alone control. My hand hovered near hers, trembling with the urge to bridge the space, to let touch speak what words could not. Her fingers twitched, almost imperceptibly, toward mine. The electric anticipation of contact was almost unbearable. And yet, when the knock came again, sharper this time, the world intruded. Her eyes flicked toward the door, then back to me, and in that instant, everything, the desire, the hesitation, the guilt, was crystallized. We were closer than ever, the tension hanging in the air, both aware of how much we wanted to cross the line, and yet tethered by what we could not say, by what others might think, by the rules either of us had agreed to. I could feel her breath against my arm, the warmth of her body so near it was almost pain, and in that charged moment, we held each other in place, suspended between temptation and caution, hearts racing in synchrony, pulled closer than ever, even as we tried to resist. The room had grown smaller again, though nothing had changed. Just us. The faint hum of the heater, the distant chatter from outside, the subtle scent of her perfume, it all pressed in around me, tighter than any words could. She stood close, too close for comfort, and yet not close enough. My chest ached with a mix of longing and hesitation. "I can't stop thinking about you," I admitted, the words tumbling out before I could filter them. My voice was low, almost a whisper, and I watched her eyes widen just slightly. She froze, a quiver passing through her lips, and for a heartbeat, the air between us was charged enough to spark. "You shouldn't," she said, almost trembling, though her hand reached toward me anyway, brushing against my chest, brushing against the shirt that separated us like it could barely contain the tension. I closed the distance just a little, careful, deliberate. My fingers lifted a stray strand of hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear, feeling the warmth of her skin under my touch. Her eyes fluttered, caught somewhere between surrender and fear, and my pulse spiked as though it had a mind of its own. "You're tempting me," she whispered, her voice breaking, a tremor I could feel more than hear. Her shoulder pressed lightly against mine, almost testing, almost asking. The scent of her hair, vanilla, faint musk, wrapped around me, pulling me closer without permission. I could see the inner battle waging across her face, desire, fear, hesitation, guilt. Every micro-expression, every catch in her breath, told me more than words ever could. And I wanted to be reckless, to cross the invisible line that neither of us dared speak aloud. "Then let me," I said softly, my lips just brushing the shell of her ear, and she shivered in response. The tiniest motion, yet it carried the weight of all the unsaid things between us. I could feel the heat of her body pressing against mine, subtle, almost accidental, and it left me unsteady. She pulled back for a fraction, just enough to catch her breath, but her hand lingered on my chest, reluctant to leave. Her gaze searched mine, desperate for something, permission, certainty, maybe a promise we weren't ready to name. "I shouldn't," she whispered, the words unfinished, swallowed by the gravity of what we were teetering on. Every nerve in my body begged to finish the sentence, to close the gap, to let everything fall into that one irreversible moment. Her lips parted slightly, eyes glistening with emotion, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The world outside could disappear. The knock, the hum, the faint distant noises, they didn't exist. Only us, suspended in that fragile, combustible space. I leaned in, careful, deliberate, closing the distance just enough that the warmth of her lips brushed mine, but not fully, not yet. Her eyelashes lowered fractionally, her hand brushing mine again, lingering, holding. The tension was unbearable, intoxicating. And then, she whispered something that made my chest tighten, a confession, a dare, a surrender all at once. "My body knows this is wrong." I smiled softly, brushing a fingertip along her jawline, my voice low, almost reverent. "Then let me teach it something better." The air between us seemed to crackle. We were inches apart. Breath mingling. Hearts pounding. And the moment hung, suspended, on the very edge of everything, ready to tip out. We had barely exhaled from the tension of the previous moment when her phone buzzed again. This time, she picked it up with a hesitation that made my pulse tighten. A message, a notification, something she hadn't expected. Her thumb hovered over the screen, and I could see the flicker of something, fear, guilt, anticipation, crossing her face. "It's nothing," she said quickly, though her eyes betrayed her. The words stumbled out too fast, too defensive, and I caught the tremor in her hands as she set the phone down. I wanted to reach for her, to steady her, but I froze, sensing that any touch right now carried more weight than we could afford. "You're hiding something," I said softly, not accusatory, just observant. My eyes lingered on her, tracing the subtle tension in her jaw, the tight grip on the edge of the table. Her vulnerability made her irresistible, and I fought the urge to close the last few inches between us. She stepped back, almost imperceptibly, yet the movement felt like an entire barrier had risen between us. I didn't want you to know," she whispered. Her voice was low, almost breaking. My chest ached with the weight of the unsaid, the secret she had carried alone until now. Her admission shifted something. Suddenly, the risk was real, tangible. Every glance we'd shared, every brush of skin, suddenly felt like a gamble. My hand itched to reach for hers, to anchor her in the storm of tension and fear. But restraint felt urgent, necessary, because the stakes had changed. I stepped closer anyway, careful not to overwhelm her. Her breath brushed against my cheek as she shifted toward me, involuntarily or not, and my pulse spiked. The scent of her perfume, the warmth of her skin, it was intoxicating, and yet every inch forward carried the echo of danger. "I shouldn't be here," she murmured, and the words trembled on the edge of confession and desire. Her hands brushed mine, briefly, almost accidentally, but the electricity that ran through us was undeniable. Her lips parted slightly, as if wanting to say something more, and I caught the faintest quiver in her shoulder. "I don't care what you shouldn't do," I whispered, my voice low, close enough that she could feel the vibration against her skin. "I only care about right now." Her gaze locked onto mine, searching, hesitant, desperate. She trembled slightly, a shiver passing through her that made me ache to hold her. The attraction between us had never felt sharper, more dangerous. Every nerve-ending screamed to cross the line, and yet the fear, the knowledge that this moment carried consequences, made it almost sweeter. Finally, she exhaled, a slow surrender that wasn't complete, but enough. She let her hand linger near mine, brushing it softly, her eyes shimmering with uncertainty and longing. It was a quiet choice, subtle, but loaded with intention. I mirrored her, letting my fingertips hover just above hers, feeling the static electricity in the space between. The risk, the revelation, the desire, it all converged in that charged silence. And then she whispered, almost to herself, "I don't know if I can do this." I leaned just enough to let my lips brush the corner of her mouth. "Then let me show you," I murmured, and the room seemed to shrink, the moment taut with the inevitability of what was coming. The room felt impossibly small, as if the walls had leaned in to witness what was about to happen. She stood in front of me, the faint glow of the lamp catching the curve of her face, the shimmer in her eyes, and every instinct in me screamed to close the distance. Yet, for a fleeting moment, hesitation gripped us both, fear of judgment, of consequences, of the unknown. "I can't," she murmured, but the words faltered, half denied, half confessed. Her breath itched, and I could feel it, warm and fragile, against my cheek. The hesitation, the tension, the electric anticipation, it all pulled me closer, despite my better judgment. I lifted a hand, letting my fingers hover near hers, tracing the air without touching, letting the anticipation build. Her gaze followed mine, unblinking, searching, questioning. "I want to," she whispered, the words almost lost in the charged silence. The small distance between us seemed to hum, every inch loaded with meaning. I reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face, feeling the warmth of her skin under my fingertips. She closed her eyes for the briefest instant, leaning in slightly, testing the connection, her pulse quickening in sync with mine. "Then don't stop," I breathed, voice low, deliberate, letting the weight of desire carry across the tiny space. Her hand moved, almost instinctively, resting lightly against my chest, and the contact was electric. We swayed together in silence, neither needing words. Her shoulder brushed mine, her hair occasionally touching my cheek, and the smallest movements became declarations of intent. Every hesitation, every micro-expression, every quiver of breath told the story that neither of us could speak aloud. "I've never felt like this, with anyone," she admitted, voice breaking slightly. There was vulnerability there, raw and unguarded, and it made my chest tighten with longing and protectiveness. I leaned just close enough to let my lips graze her temple, her jawline, tasting the warmth of her skin without crossing a line we weren't ready to cross. "I know," I whispered, feeling the weight of the moment, the gravity of the choice. "I feel it too. Every second I've tried to fight it, it only pulls me closer." Her fingers traced the edge of my shirt, a subtle, deliberate touch that carried more meaning than words. The room seemed suspended in time, the air thick with our combined breaths, our racing hearts, and the unspoken promise that we were teetering on the edge of something irreversible. Finally, she exhaled, a long, shuddering breath, surrendering without words. She leaned fully against me, her forehead resting lightly on mine, her hands settling against my chest. I wrapped my arms around her, anchoring us both, letting the closeness speak what words could not. In that quiet, suspended moment, we understood each other fully, for all the restraint, all the hesitation, all the longing that had pulled us here. There was no judgment, no fear, only acknowledgement. We were exactly where we were meant to be, raw, human, and completely honest with ourselves and each other. The distance was gone. The tension remained, but now it was shared, known, and it didn't need to be conquered, it just was. The evening had softened into quiet. The tension that had haunted us for weeks still lingered, a faint hum beneath our skin, but it no longer threatened to tear us apart. Instead, it had become something shared, a bridge between two hearts that had skirted danger long enough to understand themselves and each other. She leaned against me as we sat on the couch, the faint glow of the lamp catching her profile. I could feel her hand intertwined with mine, fingers laced together as though the gesture could anchor both of us to this reality we'd fought to reach. Her head rested lightly against my shoulder, warm and soft, and I inhaled the familiar scent of her hair, vanilla, faint musk, a memory of every moment that had drawn us closer. "I was so scared," she admitted, voice low and trembling, "of what people would think of everything." I brushed a strand of hair from her face, my thumb resting lightly on her cheek. "I know," I whispered. "I was too. But none of it matters now, not if we're honest with ourselves. Not if we're here together." Her eyes fluttered open, meeting mine with a mixture of relief and wonder. There was still hesitation there, a trace of lingering fear, but it was tempered by the warmth of trust, the kind of trust that only comes from being truly seen. I leaned in gently, pressing my forehead against hers, letting the silence speak louder than any declaration. "I can't believe we made it," she murmured, her lips brushing mine in a delicate, almost shy movement that carried all the tenderness of our journey. "You didn't make it alone," I said softly. "Neither did I." We stayed like that for a long time, swaying slightly on the couch, hands still entwined, breaths mingling in the quiet room. The age gap, the social fears, the unspoken judgments, they all felt irrelevant now, dissolved by the shared understanding that what we had was real, messy, human, and ours. Every so often, her fingers would trace idle patterns along my hand, a small reminder of the intimacy we'd earned without rushing, without forcing it. I rested my chin atop her head, feeling her warmth, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against mine. There was nothing to fix, nothing to rush, only the simple perfection of presence, of closeness, of knowing that we had chosen each other. Finally, she shifted slightly, tilting her head back to look at me, and I smiled. The glow in her eyes was something I'd never forget, a mixture of relief, desire, and quiet joy. "We'll figure it out," she said, voice steady now, confident in a way that made my chest ache with pride and affection. "Yes," I whispered, brushing my lips briefly against her temple. "We already have." We leaned back into the couch, shoulders touching, hands still entwined, and for the first time, the silence was comforting, not suffocating. The world outside could wait. We were here, together, and it was enough. And as the room darkened around us, I knew this was the beginning of something neither of us had dared to hope for but both of us had silently longed for. Engagement questions for YouTube. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?